This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by ADM.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. We're glad you're with us. We have a man reporting in from overseas this weekend.
All the way from Beijing, China. I first went to China in the mid-'70s, have been there 10 times since. Every time it's a different country. So let's find out what it's like now as we check in with Steve Bridge in Beijing.
Max Orion on the ground here in China, and the trip is, well, it's just starting out, but it has been amazing. As we first step foot in China, though, we are reminded of the biggest issue between our country and theirs right now, and it is all about trade, tariffs and retaliatory tariffs back and forth. One of our early stops here on this trip was to meet with Ambassador Terry Branstad. Of course, the former governor of Iowa is very understanding of the impact on trade and agriculture, and that's why he says he has told the Chinese here that this Trump administration will be dealing with trade and these issues very differently than the previous administration.
Well, I've tried to explain to the Chinese that this new administration is not as patient as America has been in the past, and that we feel, and the president feels, I think, strongly, that America has not been treated fairly, and this needs to change. And this is the message that Ambassador Lighthizer and other people in the administration have delivered. And I'm hopeful that the Chinese are going to come to the realization that and they say they don't want a trade war, that they want to work these things out, but so far they haven't been willing to make significant enough fundamental changes in their policies in order to achieve that. The administration is not willing to accept a few crumbs. They want to see some really fundamental change that occurs in the near future and not 3 or 5 years from now.
Ambassador Branstad says when it comes down to it, he believes that China wants the U.S. to be a good trading partner, and the efforts underway are worthwhile.
We need to bring these things to a head. We need to get those resolved. And I think the Chinese, at the end of the day, really want to have a good working relationship with the United States. They recognize that they can't produce enough soybeans or some of these food items, agriculture items that they need on their own.
The U.S. recently regained access for U.S. beef to that Chinese market. The ambassador says the win highlights the pathway forward for the White House and President Trump to work with the Chinese and President Xi to resolve the current trade situation.
And President Trump told me when I was in his office, in the Oval Office, that he does want to get this resolved. And my advice to him was to stay in close touch with President Xi on both the North Korean issue and on the trade issue.
Branstad says he is still very optimistic about this relationship between the United States and China, and that President Xi and Trump will come to an agreement because the Chinese need ag products from the United States. Reporting in Beijing, I'm Steve Bridge for This Week in Agribusiness.
Our thanks to Steve Bridge and also to Ambassador Terry Branstad, who has that personal relationship with the President of China.
The market for U.S. pork and beef in China isn't massive, but it's an important one. For pork producers, it's a place to ship cuts Americans don't eat, and beef producers wanted the China market for new growth. But currently, a 62% duty on pork is driving up the price of protein, says U.S. Meat Export Federation's Joel Haggard.
It's caused prices out of the United States on those items that we send to China to drop a bit. And this is kind of coming at a inopportune time because Chinese pork production is ramping back up and total pork imports are dropping into China.
Joel says the value of pork imports are dropping in relationship with the higher import duties.
It's difficult to raise prices because the U.S. market share in China is not, it's only 13%, so there are alternatives.
On the beef front, the U.S. had just opened the market back up in China, and imports were on the rise, hitting the highest total in May since the market had opened. Joel says it's a setback for hard-won access and acceptance.
We've invested a lot of capital and manpower trying to develop these initial distribution channels, get some basic market penetration into influential steakhouses, family restaurants, supermarkets, and this sets us back a bit.
Joel says overall, plenty is at stake.
We've done some Meat Export Federation calculations on possible losses. There's export losses and then there's value losses as items, the prices of items adjust downward. So they could be in high hundreds of millions of dollars. And then on the beef side, because the market's been small, it's less, but it does set us back in terms of kind of the schedule we were planning on to develop the market.
All is not lost with the trade troubles. U.S. meat exports have been strong to other markets.
On the pork side, I mean, we're lucky to have had, at least for the trade data that's available, very strong markets that have kind of offset. If you look at the trade statistics, the value of pork exports for the first 4 months total were basically even with last year. But moving forward, I mean, we do see some risks. But China only takes a small percentage of our total exports, so having that diversified export portfolio is extremely important.
Reporting in Hong Kong, I'm Steve Bridge for This Week in Agribusiness. Here on our trip to China, we have heard plenty about moving millions of people from the countryside to the cities. They fill all of those big buildings that you've either seen on TV or to your travels here to this country. As those buildings are filled up, they are generally filled with folks from rural areas. But what is farm life like far away from all these major cities here in China? We had a tour guide in the city of Xi'an, Michael Chong, and Michael was able to share with us directly exactly what that experience is like growing up as a farm kid in China.
Daily life in the countryside of village, which is far from a city, very basic and simple. Because in my family, the farmland we have just around 600 square meters per person. So very small farmland.
But farmers in China did adapt. They respond to markets in the same way they do in the U.S. Michael says overall, a farmer makes about $300 a month. That's less than half of what workers in the city can make, so they often have off-farm jobs, and they have changed the crops that they grow.
We grow wheat, we grow peanuts, we grow sweet potato, we grow even soybean or corn. But right now, mostly we grow this apple tree and peach tree, because compared with these grains, fruit more expensive. So by growing this thing, we can earn a little bit more.
Michael's farm town is about 2,500 people and about 10 hours away from the city he lives in now by train. His path out shared by a staggering number of other Chinese from small rural communities, about 280 million moving from those towns to the city. But for Michael, the path was also laid by a college education. As the oldest of 4 boys, he was picked to go to school. He says he understands how fortunate he was.
We had noodles twice a day, and when I was little, most of the time, we always felt hungry. And you can see sometimes we just had a kind of a plain taste steamed bone with raw garlic and sugar. Yeah, eat them together just to try to give it a little bit of taste.
Well, Michael, as all of our guides has been wonderful in showing us around here in their home country of China. Very proud of their country, very proud too of their government, but eager to make sure that both the Chinese and the United States can get along and our relationship can continue to benefit both countries. Reporting in Xi'an, I'm Steve Bridge for This Week in Agribusiness. We're here on the banks of the Pearl River in Dongguan City in China. This is the Ma Xiang port. Behind me there is a Panamax vessel that just arrived last night. That Panamax vessel is just a small portion of the capacity of this port, but
The Chinese that own this port want that capacity to increase. Expansion is needed at this port and others so they can continue to feed the incredible demand from the crushing industry. Zheng Xiaoping, China Country Director with the United Soybean Export Council, says that in and around the Pearl River Delta, there are 20 crushing facilities. And this Wilmar crusher is looking to expand capacity. Currently, they crush 11,000 metric tons of soybeans a day. Expansion plans are going to push that total to nearly 20,000 tons a day. Company-wide, the expected growth is staggering.
And for that big group, currently it's like over 50,000 a day, and they want to, in 5 years' time, they want to add another 30,000 metric tons into their existing capacity, making them the number one in China, like over 80,000 metric tons daily capacity for this group.
But can that demand for protein meal, and especially soybean meal, continue as tariffs impact the price and availability of U.S. soybeans?
And the crushers believe it's temporary, and they want to supply the demand for the feed industry. Currently, they cannot crush more beans from the U.S. They want to try to seek some alternatives, like the canola from Canada and some other feed ingredients, and also the beans from non-U.S. origins. So to keep their operation and to supply the need in this particular region.
To keep market share for U.S. soybeans over competition from South America and canola from Canada, USEC says they keep telling the story of the U.S. bean, even in the face of tariffs and increasing costs.
We have these competitive advantages in terms of the consistent quality, the efficient logistics, timely delivery, and also the sustainability. U.S. can produce sustainably the soybeans to supply the customer needs in China, and also the beans itself is rich in digestible amino acid. In terms of this amino acid profile, U.S. has the advantage over other origins.
The crusher seen here produces full-fat soybean meal, a product that is a growing market in China. Zheng Xiaoping says that product is where U.S. soybeans shine.
Like 80% is from the U.S. So the customer prefer the full-fat soy processed from U.S. soybeans. So we're now building the preference. We are communicating all these advantages of U.S. soy to build the preference for U.S. soy, not for others.
USEC tells us ports are getting more efficient all over. They're investing heavily in automated loading and unloading systems for moving grain from ocean-going vessels to inland barges. Barge shipment in China takes the place of semi-delivery in the U.S., as crushers more often than not take grain shipments directly from the river.
Here at the Maoshang port, there's also expansion underway in the storage of grain. They take in corn, soybeans, wheat, barley, and canola. Right now, they can store about 750,000 tons of those commodities, and they're adding another 400,000. In Dongguan City in China, I'm Steve Bridge for This Week in Agribusiness. We all know that China is making a tremendous investment in their infrastructure. Think about high-speed rail, new airports, apartment buildings everywhere. But they're also making a big investment right now in animal agriculture, and much of that is in response to consumer demand. Their consumers are also interested in food transparency, knowing where their food comes from. And that's why a CP Lane facility outside of Beijing is so high-tech.
The CP farm is on the outskirts of Beijing, but houses millions of birds. The showcase farm is set up to bring groups of Chinese through to demonstrate the high-tech nature of putting eggs in the hands of consumers. Much of this started after a fake egg scandal in China a few years ago. CP is taking steps to overcome it and is trying to connect to consumers. Dr. Richard Han is the technical director in China, the United Soybean Export Council.
On this side, there are 3 million layer hens on site, just one side, all highly automated, and they paid greater attention to food security and egg quality. And as you saw, the only feed ingredients they use, soybean meal and the corn. So food safety and quality is a priority for this site.
Those Chinese consumers eat a lot of eggs. China is far and away the world's #1 egg producer. According to FAO stats from the UN, China produces more than 4 times the eggs the United States does. And as China shifts its ag production to these high-tech facilities, well, they're taking over. Here, robots tend to hens far more than humans do. One worker oversees more than 160,000 birds. It serves to protect the biosecurity inside the barns.
It's probably one of the few, but it's more egg layer companies planning to more modernize the facilities and expand the size. And this one is highly automated, as you can see that it's checking birds by robots. And this is to reduce the human contact with the birds and also reduce the disturbance of human enter the facility.
Another step in automation and protection of food security is the feed mill. Richard says that U.S. beans are preferred here in China for egg farmers due to the high amino acid content and consistent quality. With an on-location feed mill, CP has taken another step to automate the process.
There's no bagging or transportation, so this also it's more efficient and also reduce any contamination during the between the location.
That egg-laying facility with about 3 million hens produces 2.7 million eggs a day. Reporting in Beijing, I'm Steve Bridge for This Week in Agribusiness.
Well, my first glimpse, got to remember, I said earlier it was really pretty backward in a lot of ways, but we were trying to develop trade with China. I was state director of agriculture in Illinois, and we came over with an agricultural delegation of about 12 individuals, and we brought a gift for the Minister of Agriculture of China. And the gift we brought him in the airplane with us, and it was a Yorkshire boar. So hey, we lured him out, and the minister met us on the airport.
From that visit in the late 70s to another in the 80s as Secretary of Ag, John has seen China develop into a world-leading economy.
When I was here before, it was just really, backwoods stuff, planting the rice and the water and doing everything by hand. And today, they got some modern equipment, harvesting. They spent a lot of money on agricultural research. They're importing food from everywhere in the world. We were in a fresh market and a supermarket, and there was food from everywhere. So they're really progressing.
John says those packed supermarkets and grocery stores need to be filled every day for the 1.4 billion needing to eat, and the Chinese don't have the capability to do it all themselves.
They only have maybe 20-some million acres of cropland that they can use to feed all of these billion people and more. So they're going to continue to import a lot of food, and they will be a great market. And we want to be sure that we get our share of that. And of course, right now we're a little concerned about a trade war, but I think in the end, if you just want to look down the road, China's going to be a good market.
So the need is clear. China has to have a reliable supplier of food, and the United States needs a market for ag products. John says a good relationship only makes sense, but the Chinese have to be ready to play by the rules.
They do break a lot of rules. But I'm not sure tariffs is going to fix the problem. It might make it even worse on us, but somehow the world will have to pressure China. And China, they know they need to do some things, but everything's going so well for them, they don't want to screw anything up, see? So it's not going to be easy to press them to make some of these reforms that they need to make.
Right now we're here in what they call a wet market in Guangzhou, China. Behind us is the lower level of this market, predominantly filled full of fruits and vegetables. The Chinese, the traditional Chinese, those older consumers, still love to shop on a daily basis for all of their food products, so they come to places like this to do it. Now, we met Jay Lau. He is a bit of a merchant, a broker that helps farmers out in the countryside connect to these consumers and have access to markets like this.
You can sell everything here.
And he's talking about mobile apps. Alibaba and Taobao are two of the leading sites, and he creates the digital store there to replace the spot in the conventional wet market. With a technology gap, though, with some Chinese farmers, that's where Jay comes in.
But the problem is that the farmers cannot do it by themselves because they need a lot of technology. And the farmers, they don't have any ways to use a computer to upload the products on list. So they need the people to help them. That's quite a bit important that for the people for the farmers to list on the products on cell phone.
Right now, Jay is on the front lines of watching farmers shift practices away from production of traditional commodity crops.
And a lot of farmers then they give up the traditional farm industries that there were traditional farm industries, for example, farming the rice, farming the pigs, because they doesn't sell at a good price, right? And so we are helping them to farming the much the better economic the agriculture products, for example, apple, the cherries, instead of rice, that makes more incomes.
Trillions of dollars are being spent through mobile phones in China, but when it comes to being a successful seller online, you need a brand. Here, the Chinese are drawn to them out of a concern about food safety. A strong connection with a brand can build loyalty and trust, and the hope is it'll open up other marketplaces.
In future, we want to find more international buyers from other countries like America and Europe.
Research groups suggest that 45% of all shopping in China is now done online, making access to direct-to-consumer sales so important for farmers.
Markets like this are an absolute beehive of activity here in China, and certainly indicative of the way that traditional consumers like to shop. It is essentially a giant farmers market, but consumers are also shifting towards supermarkets. Steve Bridge reporting in Guangzhou, China for This Week in Agribusiness.